Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Pragmatic Alchemy Podcast. I am your host, Courtney Edwards, and today I am joined by a friend. And so all of my guests have been people, well, no, let me back up. Some of the guests I've had were people that I met really just because they were going to be on the podcast. And then last week's guest, or 2 weeks ago now, I guess, Merritt Minnemeyer is a friend from the business world. But today's guest is a different kind of friend because she's a deep, deep, deep in my heart friend because she is a friend from the Down syndrome community. And I only mention that so that I can preface this episode with just how much gratitude and love I feel just that today's guest is in my life. We're not going to talk about Down syndrome specifically. I don't know, maybe it'll come up, but we're talking about a different topic today. But the reason that today's guest is on the show and the reason that I reached out to her and said, please, please, please come talk with me about this topic is because our paths intersected a few years ago as moms of kiddos with Down syndrome. So today's guest is my friend Jenny Hasted from Maryland. She's coming at us from the Chesapeake area. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how I. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So the Chesapeake area of Maryland, and Jenny is a mom. She is a part-time podcaster and production professional for the recovery sort of podcast, which I'm sure she's going to talk about in a minute. She runs a recovery sangha, and so for folks who are not familiar with that term, it's a Buddhist oriented community for folks who are in recovery. And Jenny herself is in long-term recovery. So today we are talking about how to have a mindful relationship with substances. We're just going to call it substances. And so this could be alcohol, it could be other drugs. To some extent, I think what we're going to talk about could apply to behaviors. And we're not here specifically to talk about sobriety, although Jenny's going to share very generously of her personal journey and her story. But my hope is that the takeaway from this conversation isn't that you should be sober, that's the path that all of us are going to end up on, but just that if you have questions or you've been questioning your own habits or you're just really looking to establish some better habits, that we're hoping that what you take away from this conversation is a way to use meditation or mindfulness or mindful practices to establish a relationship that you just feel really comfortable with the substances that are available to you in your life. So nobody's going to tell you that you have to be sober, that you have to quit drinking, you have to join AA or any other type of group. We're just saying let's use a thoughtful approach and intentionality into these behaviors and these habits that we have. Does that sound about right to you, Jenny?
That sounds about right.
All right. So then why don't you tell the people, now that I've told them how much I love you, why don't you tell them about yourself so that they can begin to love you too?
I love you too, and I think it's so great. I'm really flattered that you invited me on, and I'm on, like all your guests are so great. I almost feel like an imposter because I'm like they're all experts on everything. Like I'm not in the same league, but I guess I am an expert on being an alcoholic and being recovered. Um, so so before I knew you, before we ever met, um, I was an alcoholic. I didn't get sober till I was 37. And yes, I already had my daughter then. And just a quick note, we're not going to talk about Down syndrome, but drinking does not cause Down syndrome. And if drinking did cause Down syndrome, there'd be a lot more people with Down syndrome. um,
I appreciate that disclaimer because there are a lot of misconceptions about what does or does not cause Down syndrome. So yes, this is not, there's no through thread there at all.
I had a lot of guilt because of the misinformation, even like that popular What to Expect When You're Expecting book. Like I had one of the versions from the 70s and it literally said in there that they didn't know where Down syndrome came from, but it could be drinking. I was like, great, because those are still in circulation. But anyway, that's
No,
not true.
that's terrifying.
Isn't it? Yeah. I mean, because these are the books that like your old auntie passed down, like, this is helpful, read this. And I'm like, had a child with Down syndrome. I already was like so filled with guilt and shame. Like I did this, and then I have this book. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that.
No, but I think it's important, and it's an important part of your story. So you got sober after River was born?
Yes, she had just turned 2 when, I guess I hit my bottom, and then, I I had an opportunity to go to outpatient rehab. I didn't want to, but it was my job. It was like, "We think you need rehab." And I was like, "Well, I guess to save my job." And then my husband was like, "I think you might have a drinking problem." So I did it. And within 2 weeks of outpatient rehab, and what that outpatient looks like is 3 nights a week after work, I was going to 3 hour sessions at an outpatient rehab. Within 2 weeks, I mean, within the first week, really, I was like, yeah, I'm an alcoholic. Like they educated me on addiction and pointed out in my life where I was unmanageable, which is a very like AA term. What does that mean to be unmanageable? I didn't even know because actually my mind was so garbage, like new vocabulary. I was like, what does it mean to be unmanageable? Like I'm going to work, I'm being a mom. But really, was I living the life I wanted?
Mhm.
No, I was super unhappy, super angry. I was not in control. So anyway, very quickly in outpatient rehab, I was convinced I was an alcoholic. So I went from doing it to save my job to doing it because I wanted a better life.
Mhm.
And so that carried me through. I did outpatient, which set me up for 12-step recovery. And um, I think it literally saved my life. Like 12-step recovery, I probably would have died either in a drinking and driving accident or maybe suicide, because I certainly had suicide thoughts, or just plain old drunken stupidity would have killed me.
Mhm.
Um, and so the outpatient rehab set me up 12 steps, and I credit that with saving my life. I really do. And um, 12 steps, it's not supposed to be Christian based, but in practice, and it probably has to do with the area where you live. It's in practice, it's very Christian based, and that's cool. I was totally with it, but then I started to have questions. Like I started to, um, you know what? It felt like spiritual bypassing, if I could throw that in there, and I was getting uncomfortable. Like a big message in AA was like, your alcoholic mind can't make good decisions. So follow the 12 steps and the group and you will do good. So it was like this message of there's something wrong with you. You'll never be right. There's something wrong with you. And I was like, God, I'll never be right. I just never be right. But then because people come into 12 steps from all walks of life and all kinds of interests, somebody would come in and like share a Buddhist quote or a Buddhist philosophy. And I'm like, what's that? I like that. And so then I picked up a book I hadn't read since college. By the way, I did not graduate from college. I drank my way out of college, but I did have quote unquote some college. Um, but in college I read The Art of Happiness. This is so funny. I got to the part in Art of Happiness, so where they talk about the precepts and they're like no intoxicants. I'm like, well, guess this isn't for me. Anyway, so I looked back up the Dalai Lama's Art of Happiness, and I was like, yeah, this I like this, and that led me to my next teacher, Jack Cornfield, which led me to Tara Brach, which led me to Sharon Salzberg, which led me to Ram Dass, which led me to I like too is there's this YouTube Doug Secular Dharma. That's a good one too.
Oh, I
So
don't know that one. I'll have to check that one out.
he's great. And I used to put him on, like I used to work out in the basement and I'd put him on while I worked out, um, and so I was still in 12 steps, but then learning about Buddhism. And as you know, a big part of Buddhism is meditation and mindfulness. So I'm learning about that. And like I've heard, about meditation, and my idea of meditation uh, was a bit like perfectionist and Hollywood, like I thought you were blanking out your mind. And I would make jokes like, yeah, I'm going to learn to levitate because that's the kind of humor level. Like, so I'm in my 4th year of 12-step recovery, doing great. I got lots of friends, which means a lot. Community
Mm.
is important in my recovery, having friends, relationships. Then I heard about a Buddhist recovery program. I'm like, what? I need to do this. It's called Refuge Recovery. And there was one about an hour and 15 minutes away from me, which is not convenient. But I was looking for something because I was feeling uncomfortable in AA. It wasn't, I had so many questions.
Mhm.
And people would say, I'd have an issue and would say, well, God's got this. I'm like, that's not good enough for me. And I don't, I seriously don't want to judge people who that works for, but it wasn't working for me. Like,
It wouldn't work for me either. Yeah, no. I think
yeah,
I'd be like, "I'm out."
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I went and checked out this refuge recovery, and it was really, like, really felt good. I was like, yes, these people in recovery are my people. But it was too far away. It was an hour and 15 minutes at rush hour. And I have a family, and
I would say you had 2 little ones at that point then, right? Because yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah.
Millie, the week I left outpatient rehab, I got pregnant with Millie. So, hey, we were happy. We were in love.
Yeah, 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 welcome home gift.
Yeah, 1 year anniversary, which is a big deal in 12 steps. It's like a big party. And I had like a big old baby bump. And oh my God, people were there were like, is this what happens when you get sober? Like, um, but it's so funny. When you're working the 12 steps, it can be really emotional too. And you're already emotional because you're pregnant. It was just like tears. So anyway, um, on refuge recovery, but it was too far away. So I went to a couple meetings there, got the book, got some names and numbers, and stayed in touch with these people. And then I found like online community. So just through Facebook and Instagram, I started making friends online who are in Buddhist recovery. And that really supported me. And then that's when I really started my meditation practice. That's when I got serious. And it was daily. And uh, it's not work when you want it, it's joy. And I explored all kinds of meditation. Um, I tried, Insight Timer, the app. Through that, I tried all kinds of things, and I found what I like most. And really, I really like insight meditation. So it's the Jack
Mhm.
Korn rock, uh, um, and then silent meditation too, of course, just silent. Um, so about a year passed, and the local grassroots recovery organization in my county, it's called Voices of Hope. It came down to my small town and had like a town hall. They announced it on social media, and they're like, hey, we want to do something for the recovery community. Come one, come all. So I went. And by the way, I was still anonymous at this point because I really had a lot of shame about being a mom who was an alcoholic. I was afraid what people would think of me. That's past now. So it's funny to even talk about it. But I was still quiet and anonymous about my recovery. But I went to this meeting because there's no meetings where I live. I was driving 30 minutes, and I was like, we really need to start a meeting down here. Well, Voices of Hope, these people were like amazing, like totally inspiring. Like some were paid, but most are volunteer working in the community to help. My county, probably like most counties, has a huge drug problem. I mean, I see it every day. Um, so they were trying to see how they could help. And I said, hey, we don't have a meeting down here. They're like, I would like to, like, I don't even know how I asked. Well, we decided let's start one. And another guy stood up, I'll start one too. So he started 12 step. And I said, can I start a Buddhist recovery meeting? And that's how my first meeting started. And there is a rehab because we're rural here. We're in Cecil County, Maryland, and I'm in the rurally part of it. And there's a mansion rehab, so they hosted us, so we could have our refuge recovery meeting there one night, and the other guy had 12 steps a different night, and it was great. And then I really started meeting people in the community, my community, not just online, but like my people, Buddhist recovery people, and that really helped my recovery grow. That's what I wanted. I started the meeting for everybody else, but really it was for me.
Yeah. I I feel like a lot of what we do ends up that way or starts that way or ends up that way or just that both of those things can be true at the same time. Right? It's like
I wanted Buddhist recovery friends to learn with, to grow with, and like I would share this with them and they would share that with me. And, and it was just really wonderful. But giving in the community is part of the recovery. So yes, hosting this meeting, it's funny because people still like, oh, thank you for your service. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. This is service. I forgot.
it sure is. So I just to kind of correlate sort of my experience of you with what you just shared. I didn't, as you mentioned, you were anonymous for a long time, and I didn't, know that you were on a journey with sobriety until I don't know. We were interacting on Instagram one day, And for the listeners, Jenny and I have never actually met in person. We were supposed to this summer, and then Brian broke his ankle, and we canceled our vacation to the Maryland seashore. And so we have not yet met in person, but one day we will, and it will be joyous, and there will be lots of hugging. But I just remember you had kind of like sent me a message on Instagram, and you were like, "So this is my other Instagram," and it was for the sangha. It was, and you were like, "It's not really public, but I run this Instagram," and I just that was sort of my first introduction. I was like, okay, so Jenny's got another layer like that I hadn't known about before. And then it was, I want to say it was your 8-year mark that you came public, and then because you were doing your first kind of guest spot on the podcast, on the Recovery Sort of podcast. Am I remembering that right?
You are remembering that right. Good research. Yeah. And I kind of like came out as a person in recovery, still with Voices of Hope, still hanging out with them. And they, part of their battles is ending stigma. And then the founder, her name's also Jen. And she was always like, "You ready? You ready to go public?" Because I guess she wanted moms and faces like me in the community to say, like, it's okay to get help. And finally, I guess I was confident enough. I was just so afraid of being judged. It was mostly, I didn't want my children to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
I was afraid, and I was afraid I'd lose friends. I have big issues with relationships, so I was afraid I'd lose friends in the community. And I didn't, again, like, it was all about my kids. I didn't want teachers to be like, "Oh, that's the drunk mom," and especially, I guess, with the Down syndrome diet. Like, I didn't want people to be like, "That's why our kid has DS," because.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really scared. But then, uh, you know, the pandemic changed things too. I had more time to just think about what's important, and I built more self confidence during that time. So
Mm-hmm. And so it's been, what, close to 2 years now, maybe around 2 years of being out. How have any of those fears come true? Or how has that experience been to be a person in recovery out loud?
so none of the fears came true, and that's why I feel silly. Like, why did I think that way for so long? I just needed to heal. I was still healing, you know. But so many opportunities have come up. So I was a kind of anonymous guest on Recovery Sort of. But then once I was out, they're like, "Come on again. We want to talk to you again." Now, the podcast is run by two guys, Billy and Billy is husband to the founder of Voice of Hope, and then Jason is his friend. Well, so I didn't really know them well, but I've become like really good friends with them, and it's just such a great opportunity to like have this creative outlet to share my experience in a creative way. So the podcast we comes out once a week, and we try to record like every other week 2 episodes because we have all families and stuff. So we try to minimize recording time. But all month long, we're like messaging and texting, brainstorming topics, arranging guests, coming up with ideas. And then I started writing a blog. Now, this is something I've always wanted to do. Like, I've I've wanted to be a writer since I was a kid, but again, the little voices in my head saying you're not good enough, whatever. And maybe I'm not good enough. But Jason was like, write whatever you want and I'll put it on my website. And he's been super supportive that way. And so I made a goal to write a blog a month on recovery topics. And I've mostly stuck with it. I've
Okay.
challenges, but this has been so God, it's just endlessly rewarding to be to share my experience, and I think it helps others, and it's helping me. And it's not just the podcast. I've met so many friends through Voices in the Sangha, and to have people to study Buddhism with, to have people to be creative with, to have people who have just been through my situation, and for them just to share this experience with, we're not alone. It just means so much because I'll tell you, while I was drinking, I started drinking around 13. And there were periods of time where I didn't drink every day. Like, there was a time in college where I had this great group of friends and I didn't drink. Like,
Mm.
but then as those friends graduated college or hooked up with boyfriends and went away, my drinking came back. Now, when I was with those friends, if we did go to a party or a bar, I would always drink to excess. So like it was in me, you know, but I wouldn't drink daily when I had a good group of people around me. So Sangha really means everything. I mean, the Buddha said, I don't know if you know this one, but he was like, no Ananda, wise friends are the whole of holy life. That's a kind of a popular story. Like,
Mhm, mhm.
you know? Um, so I feel like I got off topic.
Yeah,
I
no,
just
no, no. It's awesome. And actually, one of the things that it called to mind, and I might mess up the person, but a few years ago, I was listening to a podcast, Armchair Expert, Dax Shepard's podcast, and I want to say that it was Yuval Harari he had on, but I might be mixing him up with somebody else. But the episode was basically on addiction, and one of the things that they were talking about is how in the United States we criminalize addiction, and so our responses to addiction are all punitive, and that there are countries, particularly in Europe, that have their responses to people in crisis through addiction is connection, and the outcomes for those populations are just so drastically different than they are in the United States because we are mammals geared towards connection, and you're talking so much about the shame and the self-doubt, and all of those are so corrosive to our connection and go hand in hand so frequently with addiction. So it makes sense to me that just the act of being in active addiction is going to isolate you, and if we can unisolate, that support is going to be really profound. On a sort of less deep note, habit change research also looks a lot at how willpower has been found to be completely ineffective. We're not geared towards making habit change through willpower alone, but accountability and community do support habit change. So it's like being connected, being a part of these communities is going to not fill the hole that addiction is trying to fill, but it's going to be a tool towards that. And also, it helps us make new patterns of behavior because we have accountability towards our people, and that supports habit change better than willpower does.
yeah, that's that's totally right. And like I like there was so much messaging growing up for me, like you got to tough it out and do it alone. And like that message is changing now, but man, that old programming is there, And so it really helps me too. And I got good education listening to like Buddhist podcasts, and a lot of the Buddhists I follow are also psychologists, or they use a lot of psychology, and that's what I really like. And did I mention Josh Corda? He's out of New York City, Dharma Pugs. He's and so following these teachers, they explain how we used to be in tribes, and our brain still functions in that level, and like that, just that science, knowing that science of our brains helped me recover. It's like, oh, no wonder I acted that way. I'm not broken. I'm just a human being with a lizard brain still operating.
Right. That's right. That's right.
um so I think one of the big things that so mindfulness started around like the 4-year mark for me. And I mean, it helped me 4-year recovery mark. Uh, Mindfulness meditation, initially, it helped me like soothe negative emotions. So being calm in the moment. And then from a place of calm, I could explore negative emotions, fearful emotions, and everything. And then over time, just doing a regular mindfulness practice, like a breath and body practice, it lowered my like baseline anxiety. Like I had no idea. I have a ton of anxiety. Nobody ever told me that. Like nobody ever was like, "Oh, you're anxious." But like that was like my baseline anxiety was like way up high. But then over time, with being sober and doing meditation, the baseline anxiety is low. So um
Can I ask you real quick? You said that you didn't know that you had a higher baseline anxiety. Were you told a lot that you were too sensitive and you needed a thicker skin? Because
yes.
that that was a lot of my experience, like just being told like, why are you so sensitive? And then as an adult coming into an understanding of like, oh no, like I just actually really have anxiety, and I am hyper vigilant, and I respond acutely to the world around me, in a way that hasn't necessarily always been my fault, but was uh, I felt blamed for as a young person.
Hmm. So there's a Gabor Mate clip floating around Instagram now, and he says, uh, against popular opinion, there is no gene for addiction. I think he's the first big teacher I've heard say that there is no gene for addiction, but there is a trait, an inheritable trait, sensitivity that can lead. That's a condition that would lead to addiction. So if you also have a family history of this is how we cope with our hard emotions, we drink and we yell and we get in bad situations. That's how we cope. So sensitivity and a history of family bad coping skills can lead to addiction, but there's no gene for addiction. And I would say I was sensitive. And there's so many people I meet in recovery who are like total geniuses, artists and intellectuals. And, they just like, how did you get messed up with alcohol? I don't know. And I think about all the artists who make like beautiful music and art and they're completely fucked up doing it, like, I,
Some of the best art I think we've ever experienced has been from that fucked up place.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I don't want to like flatter myself, but maybe who knows? Maybe the best is yet to come. I'm pretty busy right now just being a mom. Like just if I could just be a beautiful artist here at home for now, that's more than I can, like that's as much as I can ask right now.
I love that.
Um so yeah, we were talking about so yeah, anxiety, like sensitivity, and I mean, my family of origin, and I try not to blame them. I truly believe we all are doing the best we could do. My parents did not set out and be like, "Well, I'm going to shame you until you drink yourself," near death. I don't blame them for what happened. Sometimes I default like, God, I'm still mad about that. But when I'm higher minded, I'm like, nope, doing the best they can, and that's not bypass. That's the truth. I really believe they do the best they can. But I am an adult child and alcoholic too, and so I did go to a therapist for that for about a year. And that was before I found Buddhist recovery, but it was like kind of a therapist who had a Buddhist angle. But you know what? I think Buddhism and psychology are like peanut butter and chocolate. They just
They sure do. They sure do.
naturally. But yeah, so I was just thinking about, I was trying to get to the point, I guess, that mindfulness helped me navigate the tough emotions, like step outside and look at them so I could work through the healing process. And it showed me that an alcoholic is not who I am. It's just kind of what happened to me. And
Hmm.
that 12 steps was doing okay, but I think it was Buddhist recovery, mindfulness practice, and meditation that taught me that is not who I am. It's what happened to me. And that's I would really I hope everybody practices mindfulness and meditation, but especially people in recovery really need this practice, I think.
Yeah.
I would put a bumper sticker on my car if I could.
I love that. And it's interesting that you say that because when you sent me the bio for this episode and it said that you were in long-term recovery, not that I expected that you would open your bio with I'm an alcoholic, but I just noticed that. I was like, oh, a lot of people in recovery will identify as that first. And so I had noticed the word choice to say that you were in long-term recovery. And now I feel like you've just explained why where that identity is coming from versus what we think about in people who are sober that are like, hi, I'm Jenny, I'm an alcoholic, or whatever the case may be. So yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those subtle things. In fact, I've been doing it so long I forgot. But that's how I open on the Recovery Sorted podcast. I'm a person in long-term recovery.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. So I want to take a quick break. And then when we come back, maybe we can share with folks some sort of practical day to day things that you have found helpful in managing your relationship, both, as you mentioned, to sort of difficult emotions that lead to your behaviors around alcohol, or just any other ways that people might find this to be helpful in establishing a healthy relationship with substances for themselves. So we will be right back.
Ready?
And we're back. I think where we left off, and Jenny, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is you were just starting to talk about your own mindfulness practice and how that has helped you manage some of the emotions that fueled your patterns of behavior. And we were gonna kind of pivot a little bit into some practical things that we can share with listeners about how they might be able to use these tools in their life too.
So, in addition to a weekly meeting, so the recovery sangha I'm in now, we switched over to Recovery Dharma. There's actually two Buddhist recovery programs, and both are not just for drugs and alcohol. This is a recovery program for anything, like the behaviors too. So, sex, gambling, Netflix, shopping, eating. The principles of recovering from addiction are for all of them.
Hmm.
And we switched to Recovery Dharma. It's a little freer format, and it worked. Like the Sangha kind of voted on it, and we like that. Like whereas Refuge Recovery, you're following teacher Noah Levine. He's a Buddhist teacher. Recovery Dharma, you're following any Buddhist teacher.
Okay.
Also, yeah, I am not a Buddhist teacher. I can facilitate a meeting, but I didn't go to any Buddhist school or anything. No, I think that would be cool. Like I always see like Jack Kornfield Tarbrock's mindfulness school. I'm like, ooh, if I had $15,000 or what, whatever.
That's what I always say. I'm like, well, if I've ever got a couple $1,000s just laying around, then I definitely want to do the meditation teacher training that they offer. Jack Cornfield's whole, his voice, his demeanor, I could listen to him talk for days. I love him.
Factors of Buddhist teaching. Like he's he's great. And I read his books, but his audiobooks are great too, because then he reads them. And I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yep.
So much of my education is audiobook too, because I've discovered that I'm a person who needs to move around. I mean, not only do I get my housework done, but it helps me release anxiety. Like listening to audiobooks and moving around is
Hmm.
helpful to
Yeah, I relate to that.
me.
Cool.
Yeah.
So the question that I get all the time, and maybe you get all the time too, is how often do you meditate, and for how long do you meditate every day, or not every day, but when you do meditate, how often? How I
You know,
bungled that. How long? How often?
um, it changes. I don't have strict pattern. Like right now, I don't sit down at a set time. I've gone through patterns of months where every morning I start my day with a 20-minute silent. And I'm not doing that right now. So right now I meditate throughout the day, like kind of spontaneously. Like, so when I have quiet time, I'm homeschooling my daughter, but now the audience knows. So when we get done our homeschooling, usually I take some chill time and I will sit and do like a breath and body check-in, like on the couch. No set time, length, but it's usually silent. And then,
And can you just give a second to tell listeners that maybe aren't familiar with this practice? What is that? I know what it looks like. It looks like you sitting on the couch. But can you walk us through what a breath and body check-in, what that entails, just for anybody that might be curious about how to do that at home?
oh, I think breath and body is super. And I think anybody who's interested in practice, start. To me, this is like basic meditation. So a breath and body check-in is you sitting down or laying down. I close my eyes. So if I would recommend that, you're just gonna start paying attention to your breath in your nose. Feel it come in your body and out. If it helps you to count, if counting it helps you stay focused, you're just being aware of your breath coming in and out. If you could see the video, I'm like, the video on Instagram, like doing the, but feel it in your chest, feel your chest rise and fall. And it's important to notice your body. Like, yes, your breath is coming in your chest, coming down to your belly. And now I am a belly breather now. I wasn't before. I was more like a chest breather. And
Most people with anxious tendencies are chest breathers. We have to work real, real hard to learn how to get our breath down into our belly.
yeah. And the belly breathing, actually, believe it or not, it started with pregnancy because they recommended belly breathing to like subtly strengthen your core for carrying a baby. And I never noticed it then. But I'm a belly breather now. It may not be flattering on my figure, but I don't really care. And so if I find myself chest breathing, I know that I'm anxious about something. Anyway, back to the breath and body meditation. Start paying attention. If it helps to count, keep focus, count. If now people just starting out, don't stress yourself about length of time. Do it for a couple minutes every day. I'll do it sometimes for 5, 10, 15, whatever I feel needs. The body part, that's a breath practice I talked about. The body part is then you kind of do a head to toe or toe to head scan, and you send sensation, toes, each individual toe, outside of your foot, inside of your foot, top of your foot, your toenails, and then every little bit sensations to every part of my body slowly. It is so relaxing, and it really puts me in touch with my body. And my body's a sense organ. Believe, like, when I was drinking, I was just like a head, like, like this. The I was not in touch with the sensations in my body whatsoever. I do yoga now. Like, I never did yoga before. I always knew it was a good idea, but yoga is also part of my recovery practice because it puts me in touch with all parts of my body so I can use it as a sense organ. Like, I just didn't do that before. I don't even know if I'm talking right, but it's
No,
important.
I think you are. Can I,
Okay.
and actually, can I want to just sort of mention or highlight 2 points um, that you just said. Uh, the first being, I noticed you started talking about like, this is how I do a body check-in, and this is how I do my breath practice. And then you said, when I notice I'm breathing in my chest, then I know something is going on that's stressing me out. Like, I think that's important to highlight that for folks that for many people at the beginning, you start using your breath and a body scan as a way to center yourself, ground yourself, release any negative emotions, big emotions, difficult emotions that you're experiencing. And then at a certain point, you become so fluent in your breath and your body through paying that attention that you can actually use it in the reverse as a cue of shit's about to go down, because I can feel that my breath has changed. I can feel the tension in my jaw, in my neck, in my shoulders. And so it's almost to your point that it's a sense organ, it starts to give you information about what's happening internally and externally, as well as being a tool to center and ground yourself when you're feeling kind of, dysregulated or feeling that disequilibrium. The other point I wanted to make real quick is body scan is the only way I go to sleep. Yeah, I've had chronic insomnia probably since I was 7 or 8 years old, and I find body scan both the relaxation component that you mentioned, but also it gives my thoughts a place to go when I'm trying to fall asleep, so they can't cycle, which is usually the thing that keeps my insomnia hamster wheel churning. Is just cycling thoughts, all the things I didn't get done during the day, or the stupid thing I said on a podcast, or whatever nonsense fills my brain. And a body scan gives me just a place to focus my thoughts while also relaxing my body, and it is my number one sleep tool.
Oh wow. Well, you haven't said stupid on this podcast.
Well,
Um,
thanks.
how you put that, because sometimes I don't know how to get the words out. This is why I'm a writer, because I can write it and edit it. I'm not a speaker so much, but for some reason I'm on a podcast.
You're
but
on a podcast because I love you.
um, so yeah, so it becomes like exactly like so being able to read my body cues, and it's also we can add one more layer. You can calm yourself down by like when you feel the chest tension, you're like, oh shit, that means tension's here. All right, well I can take a couple intentional breaths and calm myself down. It's amazing. Like,
Mhm.
and I never knew how to work with this stuff before a Buddhist recovery program. And I'm glad. I don't know. Are they doing this in your kids' school? They're starting this in schools. Uh,
Yeah,
oh,
a little, not too much, not too much. I mean, I've taught it to them, but yeah, I don't know that they get a lot of social emotional learning stuff. I don't know how much of it is mindfulness and breath work or body connection or any of that. Yeah,
okay. Yeah.
little bits.
My 8-year-old comes home and she'll tell me like we did mindfulness, but if I tell her like take a deep breath, she's like, I don't want to take a deep breath, mom. Like I can't teach her. Like she won't hear it from me. She knows I go to meditation every week, like, but she'll get it from the school. I'm like, he'll catch on. You're a
Yeah,
breath.
yeah. I just wanted to make just kind of one point for listeners, since we are talking about how this work can impact your relationship with substances, one of a really beautiful question that I had heard posed. I was doing a month-long sobriety challenge through This Naked Mind and Annie Grace. I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she also incorporates mindfulness into work around substances. And so I was doing this month-long challenge, and one of the questions that was posed was, if your go-to after a stressful day is to come home and have a drink, what would you do if that, like, what is your next coping? If that's not available, what's your next coping? And I think this is a great avenue in, because sometimes it is recognizing that when we're activated because we had a stressful day, because the kids are acting up, because life is just really fucking hard all the time, like, to understand that we have tools in our body and in our own minds that can take the place of this sort of like knee jerk habitual, oh, when I'm having a bad day, I have a glass of wine. Maybe you can, try the deep breathing first and see if that maybe reduces your need for that glass of wine. Maybe you still have it, but I always feel like it's a good idea to, like, maybe just try this other thing just one time for 5 minutes and see if that helps more than or as much as that glass of wine would maybe help.
And the science is there. That really helped me too. Like, I could tell from my own experience that it was working, but then when I had like a psychologist say, "Oh, we did a study and this," I was like, "Yeah, see, it makes so much sense." So I think that's why, like, I dig this psychology aspect too. I'm somebody already researched it; it's there. I think they said yoga is the only that prescribes meditation practice. Oh, never mind. I
Okay.
thought I heard that like yoga was the only thing that I would recommend. Yoga, like, because it's actually proven to help people with a wellness practice. Yoga.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Interesting.
but doctor, maybe you could speak on that. But
Well, I do know, just in the field of counseling, the work of John Kabat-Zinn and mindfulness-based stress reduction is what they call empirically validated. That they've run all the psychological control studies and seen that it mindfulness-based stress reduction protocol, the 8-week protocol, has been found as effective as psychotropic medication in reduction of depression symptoms.
okay,
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah,
And
but that's not a thing you can do necessarily on your own. I mean, resources associated with that protocol and John Kabat-Zinn's writings are freely available, but otherwise you're going to see a therapist who has that training and the credentialing. Where yoga with Adrienne is, my go-to, to just be like, I'm at home and I want to do this in my living room right now because I had a really shitty day.
that's literally the second time somebody's recommended yoga by Adrian
Oh my
this
God,
week
yes,
for me.
she's like my secret best friend. I love her so much. And she's got a dog in her videos, and it's so accessible and lovely, and there's just this lighthearted good humor. Yeah, I highly recommend Yoga with Adrienne. I had known about it for a while, but I really did turned toward it during the pandemic when I wasn't going to. I still haven't gone back to classes, but when I first had to stop going to classes because of the pandemic, I went to that YouTube channel, and it's phenomenal. I love it.
That's cool. I have to check that out.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So you were asking about like what my daily meditation practice. So I just told you I usually do like a decompress. That would be my glass of wine after work, like after homeschooling, just check in. But I do a lot of like on the spot check-ins. And I think for me at least, I've done so many sits and practices that now I just apply it as needed. Yes, I apply it as needed throughout my day. Like, oh, I'm just gonna need to sit down for 5 minutes and check in with my breath and body. And then other times it takes longer. If there is a stressful thing, I just tell my family, like, I gotta go check out for a little bit, and they know I'm just, meditating in bed for a while. Certain times need more. Now, I probably would benefit. Who wouldn't benefit from a routine, whatever, twice daily, 20-minute sit? Sure. Like that reminds me of the Zen people. The Zens like sit down for like 20 minutes twice a day, but I can't seem to fit that in my schedule like right now. So,
I can't understand why.
and I'm not really suffering. Maybe I need to suffer more. And like that will be the solution. I really admire people who do that. And I think an important message I want to share with the audience too is please do not judge yourself for how you meditate. What works for you works. Like, if you lay down, super. You don't have to sit in an uncomfortable position. I lay down. It makes me relax, and my mind feels so good when my body can rest
Mhm.
because they're all connected. If your body's more relaxed laying down, that'll help your mind relax, clear, watch your thoughts. Oh yeah, and you don't have to blank out like the Hollywood image of meditation. You're watching your thoughts. You know,
Yeah, I would say as a meditation teacher, that's probably the biggest hurdle that I walk people through is that no part, particularly of Vipassana, which is the type of meditation I teach and the type of meditation you are drawn to as well. It's insight and observation of your thoughts. Our brains are thinking organs. Like we can't turn it off, right? And I have so many people come in like, oh, I don't meditate because I can't clear my mind. I'm like, good, neither can I, right? Cannot do that. But what I can do is pay attention to it and not get super caught up in whatever bullshit my thoughts are telling me on that particular day. Like you said something stupid on the podcast, right?
you'll get to know yourself so well. And that 1 year in between going from refuge recovery, and I didn't have anything until I started meditating, and I just did all kinds of meditation until I found what I really liked, what worked for me through the Insight Timer, and just practicing at home. I learned so much about my mind that year. It was like my own private school.
Mhm.
That, um, also, I think if your mind blanks out, you're probably and no judgment if you fall asleep, because you know what? That's probably what you needed in the moment. So I
That's
don't judge yourself if you fall asleep during meditation.
So I want to shift direction a little bit because one of the things I think can often be a big hurdle for folks who maybe want to consider either moderation or just reduction, particularly of alcohol. And I'll preface this question by acknowledging something I've read on various social media platforms, which is alcohol is the only drug that we need to justify not using in this society. Like, if you don't do cocaine, everybody's like, great, good, right? But if you're like, oh, I don't drink, everybody wants a reason why, and it can be very invasive, and there can be a lot of like awkward social interactions. And so I guess maybe can you speak to that part? You mentioned, the beautiful community you've been connected with and the new relationships that your sobriety has invited into your life. But did you experience pushback by being a person who does not drink alcohol? And how did you utilize these practices, or what other tools did you utilize to deal with that pushback and the discomfort that comes from it?
So in recovery, one of the basic things was people, places, and things. And so basically, I just kind of stopped seeing those people, places, and things. I was anticipating pushback. I didn't get much at all. I never got to use my like cool comebacks that I planned out for when somebody offered me a drink. Um,
Do you want to share any of them here in case people need them for themselves, or is that trademarked information?
this one, like, oh, can I get you a drink? No, thanks. I'm on duty. I wanted to use that one because then they'd be like, on duty, for what? Like,
You're a spy, a super sober spy.
um, use that one. But there wasn't much pushback. I think I went to like a neighborhood party and they couldn't believe I didn't drink. And at that point, I was so proud to be sober. I'm like, yeah, that's right. I'm like 14 months sober, or whatever. Like, so not much pushback, but by design, I stayed
Mhm.
away from people. Like, so I like these people who I thought were my friends. They were fair weather drinking buddies, kind of. I don't miss them really. And the people who were my friends, I have a really great group of mom friends locally from the Down syndrome community. We all have daughters with Down syndrome. And I was so, when I told them I was in outpatient for a month before I told them what I was doing. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I won't be able to go to the bar with you. They're like, Jenny, the only reason we went to the bar was because you wanted to. I don't know. And these people, they drink, but they drink like normal people. If they drink at all, they have like one or two, but most of the time they don't drink. Like it was just me who was always like, "Girls' night out, let's go drink." So no, I haven't had much pushback for people. I would say for people who want to be more mindful about drinking or drugs or any of the other addictions, Notice your craving and aversions. Like notice what you're trying, what you're craving. What specifically a feeling or an emotion. What are you craving and what are you avoiding? Take note of that. I think you should do regular check in on your emotions, name them,
Mhm.
and see when you're reaching for the shopping or the beer or the whatever.
Mhm.
And look at your intentions. Are you grabbing that drink because you want to get fucked up? Or are you grabbing that drink because you had a bad day? Well, take a look at that back. Like start, just slow down, slow the fuck down. That's what we should all do. Just slow down and start looking at this. Now, I find journaling really helpful. I am a paper, actually, when I'm not in paper, I do it electronically. Um, but I journal a lot, and so it helps me process. But do a paper journal, do an audio journal. Like start to look at your inner world and your relationship with these substances or behaviors.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm gonna
Put it down.
break in real quick there, and share my own vulnerability since you've been so brave and sharing so much of yours. When I did that month long sobriety challenge last year, I remember going into it. One of the first questions in the daily prompts is, "Why do you drink?" And I was like, "Why do I drink?" And then I was like, "I think I drink because I'm anxious." Right, because I tend to have a fair amount of fear of things going wrong in my life. What actually I noticed after a couple of weeks of not having any alcohol at all is that I was really fucking pissed off. And I don't know if I was letting alcohol cloud that fact, because that's much harder for me to confront the fact that I'm angry, than being afraid, because I'm used to being afraid. Right? I've been an anxious person my whole life, and so that's easy. Like I'm like, yeah, no, I'm terrified of everything. But to be able to say like, no, I'm really angry, and then to start to identify what those things are, that was really really hard. But it did change my relationship. Now I'm not in sobriety. I do still drink, and have had a mind towards moderation since doing that month long experience last year. But that, just that knowledge now of like when I'm really feeling like, oh, I just want to drink, like to be like, all right, what are you mad about? And ask myself that question and try to really hear the answer, so that then I can address what that underlying anger is, and not just be like, all right, well, let me placate it with some Sauvignon Blanc.
That is an awesome story, and that reminds me of when I saw a therapist for my PCOA stuff. One of her questions over and over is like, "Is that the truth? Like, is that like what's behind that?" Like, okay, so that's what you happen, but what's actually behind that? And I think that kind of being honest with yourself, you got to get honest and really look at what's going on, because we totally lie to ourselves. Like I think so many of us are running blind, not looking.
Mhm,
You know,
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I completely agree.
we're on
Yeah.
auto, like just day to day autopilot.
We're just sleepwalking, and I mean, I think there's so many. When I notice that about myself, or in the work I do with clients, or with my friends and family, and I recognize that people are sleepwalking, like, I don't think that it's an internal flaw. I think that there are so many societal influences that tell us to numb. The fact that alcohol is something that we need to justify not using, that it's readily advertised, that consumer mentality in the United States is like, well, you should always feel good, and if you don't, I'm going to sell you something. And just the level of distraction that media, social media, multimedia of all forms, kind of, we just live in a society that tells us every day, that we should be happy all the time, and if we're not, here are 1 million opportunities to numb yourself out. And the cynic in me is like, all of that is on purpose, because a numbed out, distracted population will never know its true power. But that's that's a podcast for another day.
Yeah. No, but I totally agree. And actually, I mean, I'm not always happy, but I have never been as happy as I am now sober. True story. Like, I mean, I joke that like being sober is the greatest buzz or trip you'll ever have. Like, because looking at the world through like sober eyes and investigating, I'm finding truly everything I was looking for when I was drinking. I'm finding inclusion with a group of friends. Like I'm finding a family. I always wanted a family, but I always self-sabotaged. I really did because I was scared to get what I really wanted. So I mean, being sober is the best buzz of all, truly, for me.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Oh, I love all that. And I think it's just, again, just to sort of reiterate, because I don't want people to walk away from this being like, oh, this was the sobriety episode. But to recognize that even just in having mindful tools and awareness and coping strategies can still provide what you're speaking about, right? Being fully aware, awake, involved, invested in your life, having a community, experiencing all of the feelings. I think one of the things that I struggle with, in terms of some of our societal imperatives is this understanding like, well, you want to numb out the bad feeling, but like that takes away the joy too, right? We don't get to self select what we feel. And if you start numbing some emotions, you're going to numb all the emotions. So you don't necessarily have to be sober to be fully invested in a wide spectrum of emotional experiences. You just have to have this sort of bent towards mindfulness, and then the ability to hold all of those emotions, including kind of the big hot ones and not just the more pleasant ones.
Yeah, it's a pendulum swing. Like for the amount of pain you can feel, it's going to be the same amount of joy you can feel.
Hmm.
And yeah, I try not to preach the Friday. I just get really excited about my own.
No, 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 and you're not preaching at all, and I'm not taking it as you're preaching, but I just really want to keep reiterating, like, that's not the goal, because it's not a goal for everybody. I do kind of believe in the relationship, and so I do believe that moderation can be a viable option for some folks. I hear all the time some folks cannot do moderation, and I get that too. But that it's really about that healthy relationship, and that is going to take all sorts of forms, and so there's not one path, because not everybody needs to be sober, not everybody needs to reach for that. And then in some people, like you're saying, it's going to be the thing that saves your life. So,
Mhm. Yeah. Um,
yeah, did we get there? No, 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 I think that's perfect. I'm very happy to wrap up here if it feels like this is a good natural spot to wrap up. Was there anything that comes to mind immediately that you had wanted to say that we didn't say?
no, I can't think of anything. But this has been a really wonderful discussion, and I can't say how. Like I think your podcast is spectacular. So please keep going.
I plan to, I want to. I am gonna link to everything that Jenny and I talked about today. So we'll put in some links for some of the recovery resources that she mentioned, and some of the teachers that we mentioned today. So Tara Brock and Jack Cornfield and John Kabat-Zinn, and some of the other resources that were brought up today. So you'll be able to find everything. If this spoke to you on your particular journey, you'll be able to find all of the things that Jenny mentioned as being really helpful in her journey. And a lot of the teachers she mentioned, I can also second an endorsement that they're fabulous. We will be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, if you have questions that you would like us to handle on the air, or any topic ideas or other commentary, you can send those thoughts to Courtney at shineandsoar.com, or complete the contact form on shineandsoar.com/podcast. You can find us everywhere you find your podcasts, and wherever that may be, please rate, review, and subscribe, because it really helps to make sure that other folks are learning about this podcast. And if you're loving it, please share it with your people, because they might love it too. I had such a fun time talking with you, Jenny. I, much like you, find gratitude in the people that your recovery journey brought into your life. I find gratitude for the people that being Lucy's mom has brought into my life. Some of the best relationships that I have come through the Down syndrome community. And so, very, very grateful to be connected with you. So grateful for your time and your vulnerability and your honesty in this conversation. I think a lot of people are going to really benefit from what you've had to share. So thank you for being with us. And listeners, thank you for being with us too. I'll see you next time. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other.